Okay, let's, as people continue to come in, I'll get underway with the formal introductions and welcomes. Continue to say hello in the chat. As I mentioned when we first logged on, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris Robb. I'm the CEO and founder of Mass Participation World. Delighted to be joined by a really experienced and diverse panel tonight. And just before I announce them, I'm just going to, as I always do, I'm going to launch the first poll to get a sense of where people are joining us from. And then start with a very big thanks. A big thank you for those of you that are joining us from all over the world, but an especial big thanks to our three panelists. As I said, a real Australian feel tonight. It's 10 p.m. in Australia right now, so really delighted that the panelists stayed up that late to join us. And a big thank you to Shannan Gove from Rosterfy for pulling the panel together. So why don't we start with introducing you. Shannan Gove, co-founder of Rosterfy, joining us from Geelong in Victoria in Australia. Hi, Shannan.
G'day, Chris. Good to be with you, mate.
Thanks so much for your efforts. Also, Melissa King, who's the CEO of the FIBA Women's World Cup 2022, which will be taking place in Sydney and is joining us from Sydney. Hi, Melissa.
Hello. Hi. How are you? Hello, everyone.
Great to see you. Thanks so much. And joining from Melbourne, Maria Coiro, Workforce Manager, IRONMAN Group. Got a busy period coming up. We were talking before we came on air. Hello there, Maria.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
No worries. I'm
just going to pop those results of the poll in there. And then just a quick bit of housekeeping before we get underway. So we're in webinar mode, which means that the best way to communicate, please, is via the chat, either the chat or the Q&A. I've got that up in front of me. Be having a look there. If you've got any questions that you would like to ask, please pop those in there and I'll try and weave them into the conversation, or we'll capture them afterwards. As I mentioned, we are live streaming on Facebook, so if you need to leave early or if you've got some colleagues that would like to watch, it will be there. And we're also recording, so it'll be up on the MPW YouTube channel. So that's on the MPW Facebook page live and the MPW YouTube channel. And as I mentioned, we're live streaming into China, which is wonderful. A couple of quick MPW announcements. Tomorrow, a very exciting day for us. We will be launching MPW Academy, which is a new content platform that we've been working on. 150 hours or over 150 hours of free content that you'll be able to access through those. So watch the announcement on our various channels. The MPW conference, it would have been the 6th edition live in Singapore, and I know Shannan was there for our last live one in 2019 on stage at the Hilton. That will be online this year from the 6th to the 10th of December. Slightly different format, 2 hours every day, morning and evening, to cover the globe. Split it up into bite-sized pieces so people can join and fit it into their busy days, and information on our various channels there. A fantastic interview that went live yesterday of the Aid Station, episode 111. An incredible guy called Danny Bent, who's the CEO of One Run. And One Run, for those of you that are not aware of it, a global initiative that will be happening on Saturday. Over 150,000 runners running in every single country in the world. Literally have entrants from every single country. It's a virtual run, literally starts at 9 o'clock in every country and moves its way progressively west. So if you're interested, just log on to onerun.com and you can download the app and sign up. World Athletics, I've been hosting regular monthly World Athletics webinars. The next one on the 3rd of November, 1400 Central European time, will be on trail running. And then the last announcement for those of you that have been supporting, thank you very much for our MPW COVID research. We put those numbers out every week. The number that we put out on Friday last week, 4,337,990 participants in mass participation events in 35 countries with only 5 recorded COVID cases, and more feedback from people that they're using this to get their race approvals to help with their process. So please continue to support that. And then if you're not already signed up, the road ahead each Friday with all of our information on all the different initiatives. So this evening, again, reiterating volunteer management, surviving and then thriving, with hopefully a big focus on how we thrive post this. a number of different areas that we're going to discuss. We're going to look at operational challenges and solutions. We're going to look at communication, the good ways to communicate, some of the downright bad and some of the ugly that we're seeing in terms of examples out there. The power of collaboration, how can we maybe benefit from shared resources, the role of technology in managing your workforces, and then really all important in terms of building legacy, engagement, and community around volunteers. I've got a number of different polls that I'm going to pop in. I'm not going to announce them. I'll just pop them up during the course of the evening. Love you to contribute to those. I'll share the results. But let's get underway by welcoming back Shannan. Shannan's got a huge global perspective, and him and his team work with events not only in the mass space. Last weekend, Chicago Marathon, the week before that, London Marathon, Expo in Dubai. So trying to get some case studies from outside of the industry. Shannan, what are you seeing operationally in terms of some of the challenges and the opportunities globally, please?
Yeah, Chris. Well, it's good to be here with you, mate, and hopefully for people listening, we can add some value, maybe different perspectives, if nothing else, about what some other people are doing in the industry. So, look, broad terms, Chris. I guess what we're seeing. Well, if we start here in Australia, Asia Pacific being probably a drop off of roughly about 40% for volunteer numbers in terms of where events were pre-COVID to where they are now. In the US, not seeing that so much. It's, I guess, a different approach that they're taking and seeming to still get some good numbers of volunteers. And in Europe, still some challenges there, absolutely. And I think a major component of these reduced numbers have been from older demographics with health risks that are still concerned. And so there are challenges, I guess, that we're seeing in terms of people not being able to alleviate those concerns, which is understandable. Also, perhaps some processes that might be missing around event time that perhaps we can learn from others around the world about what they're doing. And then perhaps some other regulations that we're seeing coming into place and requirements and topics that we can discuss from other industries as well, and in particular for not-for-profits too. So yeah, it's an interesting space, Chris, and there's been lots of learning across the last 18 months, really. I wish we weren't still talking about this, but we are, and we're dealing with it. So yeah, happy to dive into it tonight.
Fantastic. Give us a bit of a sense. I mean, one of the things that we're hearing, those numbers we're hearing all over the world, and Maria was talking about them beforehand, and we've got an interesting perspective here because we've got, from people that are putting on regular annual mass participation events to Melissa, who's planning, a big global event that happens, kind of once off. You don't have kind of test bases for this, and you might have some test events, but I'm kind of interested from a strategy perspective. One of the terms that I'm hearing, and I think it was initially coined by Mike Nishi from Chicago Marathon, saying event atrophy. So Chicago was on last year. They've had no warm-up events, first time in 2 years. What have we forgotten? What did we take for granted when we had these events rolling and lead up events? But there's some parallels with what you're planning. Is that operationally you got this event that happens once. It's show day. From an operational strategic perspective, what are some of the things that you're doing to ensure that when it comes to showtime you get it right? That may be some lessons for people in the mass participation industry.
Yeah, look, I guess in another hat that I wear, Chris, I'm on the board of AMC here in Australia, which is effectively a bit of a body we created for the mass participation industry, a bit of a voice, if you will. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges the mass participation industry is facing is that reduction of skills that we're losing to other industries, which is only fair for those people to move into other spaces. And so that in itself is a problem that needs to be addressed in terms of how do we create security for these people that have previously worked in this space without the security that they need for full-time roles. And I think there's no silver bullet for it, but other than getting back into work, it's incredible sitting here in Australia, seeing what Europe and America are able to do. We're talking about earlier, Limelight being able to have back-to-back events every weekend is a far cry from where we are here in Australia. So I guess the only point there is to say that we just need to get back to it as soon as we can, and in a safe manner, of course. But then secondly, about what can we do in the meantime for training and making sure people are as engaged as possible. Perhaps a couple of things that we're seeing with some major events perhaps that we're working with is a lot more online interviews they're having with volunteers, and they're less interviews to be asking them about their skill set, but also about their willingness to volunteer in certain roles and positions. And I think Maria will talk shortly about IRONMAN, some challenges you've faced about potentially older demographics not willing to sort of work in roles that they would have before, which is understandable. So capturing information early, Chris, through that recruitment process about where people are willing to work and what the skill sets they can bring to those roles, I think is one. And then I guess one of the other points that we've seen with our friends at Oxfam in the UK, with their drive to get younger people into their workforce, is about how do they change their recruitment streams altogether, about attracting the right people that will stay engaged with the program all the way through to delivery. And there's different programs around the world that are like Melissa's with the once-off events effectively, or the IRONMANs that have events year round, attracting the right people that are really passionate about that work, that are able to do it. And we're seeing a lot of our clients around the world moving to trying to recruit younger people who ultimately the job market's also been smashed for them too. So a way that you can create attractive programs and effectively putting experience on a silver platter for younger demographics to get them into the workforce and training them appropriately digitally through the recruitment process.
Some great insights and some examples. You talk about ways of attracting younger people. So are there some examples of, how do you get to those younger people in the first place? What are the channels? Obviously I'm sure you're going to be talking about social media access, but, are there other particular channels that you go through to make sure that you're recruiting those younger volunteers?
Yeah, look, two direct ways would be that we're seeing is the ability to have almost group leaders being able to recruit on your behalf digitally as well. So having recruitment, your specific URLs for select groups, so that friends can recruit friends into their group. Those friends can remain together within a system compared to being a name in a spreadsheet where you get mixed up. So a way that you can recruit people and they can stay together through their experience is one thing we're seeing working really well. So recruiting groups and with technology being able to keep them together. The second is about creating almost a package of experience. So a lot of students, they'll need 100 hours, 120 hours. How do you create that package for them for work that might cover 4 or 5 events and might cover different skill sets across each, and understanding what those students and young people want to get out of it as well. So speaking to the universities, speaking to the students themselves, saying, we can give you this package. Like, it's almost a direct recruitment to say, what do you want? How do we help you get it? And then from that, being able to, and that's not a one-to-one conversation, that evolves out to being a whole, whole group of university students that they are getting out of it what they need to.
I think too, one of the interesting things about volunteering is the social nature of it, and remembering why and what the value proposition is for volunteers and why they want to become involved. And really, irrespective of age categories, I know in my experience with Surf Lifesaving, senior volunteers actually came together once a year for events that they did in each of their states, because there was the social aspect. Similarly, sort of students and young people, are doing these things because there is that social component of it. And I think it's really important that we remember, yes, we have skills that we need, and we have time we need, and we have some jobs, we all have a situation where there are jobs that we hate to do, but we do it because of the things that we love to do. And so remembering, that communication of expectations and being real about, there's going to be some stuff that's not so great, but overall there are all these great things. So sort of setting up that system of understanding, what's in it for me, and that's fair enough for volunteers because they're giving of their time. So we think a lot about that from a basketball perspective too. It's the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup. There's a lot of associations and grassroots activities that's happening. They don't get the opportunity every day. In fact, you know, the last time the World Cup was held in Australia was 24 years ago, to actually be a volunteer at a major or a mega event. And so thinking about, you know, how we recognize our volunteers who may do it week on week for the mass participation events, but actually the recognition that, oh my God, somebody's done that 25 times or whatever, and how that rolls into not only recruiting, but maintaining volunteers and working up through that ladder.
And in terms of that legacy, Melissa, so, you know, you've obviously got a community of basketball clubs and players in Australia, and in terms of bringing those people in and then, I guess, pushing them back out again afterwards. I think mass participation, often they come from clubs and the like, but, you know, in terms of that balance of how many of them come from the basketball community that exists and how many of them come from the likes of university that Shannan was talking about. And this, you know, when I was in Singapore, we used to see the same thing, the 100 hours, but the students would kind of come, do their 100 hours, tick the box, and they were gone. And we tried to see how do we keep these people in. Yours is a little bit of course, it's a one-off. There's maybe less of a need, but in terms of a legacy, clearly you'd probably love to be saying, well, how do we keep them engaged in the communities? Any ideas that might be relevant for the mass participation industry of what you're doing?
I think one of the things that we're thinking about is we have a legacy program as a part of the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup. So some of the work around women in leadership, you know, daughters and dads programs and those sorts of things where we're bringing community members in. Part of that experience is them volunteering at the World Cup. So they're taking their learnings all the way through into actual experience that they can then take back with them to, you know, be it basketball or be it other volunteering opportunities, or in fact, the ability to use those skills to get a paid role. So we're certainly thinking about that. We're also thinking more broadly around Indigenous and multicultural communities and how we can engage, you know, women and girls in the program from that perspective as well, because what that then does is take people back into the community to say, oh, you know, I'm a Sudanese young girl, or, you know, I'm from a multicultural community that may not have been involved in that. Oh, well, you did it, so I can do it. So creating that environment where they can see people like them experiencing that, and we're encouraging that to happen. So you sort of seed those things in communities that might not have otherwise thought to be involved. And actually we did that very successfully in the context of Surf Lifesaving as well, which is one of the largest volunteer organisations, certainly, you know, in Australia, but in the world, week on week.
That incredible power of sport that transcends communities. And I think sometimes I've been talking a lot about the narrative around mass participation. We tend to speak a lot about races and events, but, you know, it's about community, it's about well-being, it's about health, mental and physical. And I think sometimes we miss that opportunity to tell that story. And there must be multiple case studies, or, you know, hundreds, thousands of case studies of what you achieved in Surf Lifesaving and what you're going to achieve out of FIBA that makes a massive impact on communities, and it goes way beyond just that event.
I think the other thing too is it's about sharing resources as well. So whilst you're always going to have people who are involved in your particular sport, or if it's a not-for-profit, it can be a particular, you know, discipline, be it childhood cancer or different components. The skills and experiences you gain volunteering can take you to many different areas, and that connectivity is really important and really valuable, because if somebody had a wonderful experience at, say, one of Maria's events, volunteering, you know, that they might then consider volunteering more broadly, and how do they do that? So it's about creating that community of volunteers, and that people are prepared and willing and wishing to give of their time, and how do we actually harness that?
Yeah, some great insights there. Thank you. I've just got a message. I was going to bring Maria in, but I just got a message in the chat that your internet's dropped. Can you hear me, Maria? Yeah, there's storms in Australia, and they seem to have passed Shannon and gone down the coast and hit Maria. Maria, just as soon as you're back up, if you're frozen again. So I guess just again expanding on that in terms of one of the things we wanted to talk about is the role of technology, and that's obviously the opportunity of, you know, not only from a registration perspective but an engagement perspective. Your next year, but you know, any kind of groundbreaking uses of technology, where are you looking to learn what kind of technology you might, or you've I'm sure made the decisions already, but how did you inform your technology decisions, and can you give some examples of the kind of technology that you're using to engage with your volunteer workforce?
We're early days. We actually haven't gone out yet for our recruitment of volunteers. But I think that when we think about it, for me, it is very much, and the team, it's very much about talking to the people through the channels that they wish to receive information. And that can be particularly challenging when you are looking at volunteers from, you know, young people through to more senior people who, you know, might avoid the whole technology. I don't want to use a mobile phone, but the reality today is that everybody uses technology in some form or fashion. How we talk about that technology is really important. I can remember a time with a senior person saying, I'm not using an app to go into something, I'm not doing it. And I asked them, do you sit with your granddaughter and tell stories on your computer, on a tablet or on your phone? Oh yes, I do that all the time. I said, well, you're nearly a digital native. So really having, you know, the ways of being able to communicate that, and understanding that sometimes there is face-to-face and sometimes there is, you know, online learning and things that we can do, and mixing it up and knowing what your audience is and you know, what you need them for, and what skills and training they require. So it's very much putting them at the center of the decision making.
Yeah, great point. There is it's not a one size fits all, which I think, you know, I've seen so much over the years, is just kind of like you've got to achieve A, B, C, D, but it's not customized to skill sets and to methods of communication, channels of communication. That's really useful. Thanks, Melissa. We got Maria back. Welcome back, Maria. Thank you for logging back in there. One of the things we were talking about before we came on air was the real drop in volunteer numbers, and Shannon touched on it. I've just put the poll up, and I'm sharing the results at the moment, and you know, it seems like, you know, close to 50% or around 30% lower. Some are, you know, 27% or 30 to 50% lower than normal, and some even saying 50% lower. Tell us how you're going from an Ironman perspective. And you know, we were talking also, you've got a run of events coming up. You've got your mountain bike event in Western Australia this week. You've got next weekend, you've got Noosa Tri. How are some of the operational challenges around your volunteer workforce?
Yeah, I guess similar to what Shannon was saying before, decrease in volunteer numbers. And I guess it's a multitude of different things. So it goes from, I think, events we haven't done from, you know, two years ago. 2019 was some of our last major events. So I think while we have been communicating to groups, that the lull in time has meant that people have moved on into different areas, into different roles. So we have a lot of our have been unavailable now because they've moved on to other areas. So you know, there's been a gap in information there. So we've got knowledge from key groups that we'd previously been engaging. And then, you know, in addition to that, quite a big chunk of our database, a lot of our community groups are from an older demographic at the moment, just with how fluid it is and unknown. The groups have been a bit hesitant to come back. Frozen again.
Yeah, we can still hear you, but maybe just for the time being, Maria, Melissa
might turn my video off. Yeah,
maybe try turning your video off for the time being, and hopefully that'll help.
Is that a bit clearer now?
Yeah, that is. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Sorry about that.
No
The storm has just hit on my side of town, so my internet's not doing too well with it.
No worries at all. No, we were hearing you. You mentioned, community groups, different community groups not being able to get engaged anymore. What I'm interested maybe is to then understand what are some of the lessons. One of the things I shared in the LinkedIn post yesterday was the Singapore Marathon one year. We didn't have advance warning. We had 40% no show on the day because of a storm, and it was massively challenging, but it presented huge opportunities for us to kind of redefine the workforce. What are some of the ways that you're modifying and responding to this difficulty in getting volunteers? You still there, Maria? Let's jump across to you, maybe, Shannan.
Yeah, so I guess the different ways.
You are back. Yeah, keep going there, Maria.
Apologies. Shannan, if you want to jump on this one, I'll work on my.
It's all good, Chris. We'll continue on, Chris. Sorry if you just want to. Was there another question there? Sorry, mate.
Yeah, no, just into what I was asking Maria there is, how they're adapting to the lower numbers, and I'm wondering if there's, you're getting any visibility on what people are doing. Is it changing roles? Is it using technology more? So, if you're down 50%, is that just you're scrambling to get the extra 50% to make it up, or are people having to make up the numbers, or are they changing their operational plans to adapt to the number of volunteers that are available?
Yeah, look, I'm probably not the best person to ask, Chris, but from my conversations I've had with people, it's simply dealing with the less numbers they have, but also probably needing to pay some more casual staff to do this so that they're actually getting to their minimum numbers that they need. I have heard of some smaller events not being able to go ahead because they simply didn't have the volunteers they needed for road closures and things like that are critical. So I think what we've found is part of that planning for your event is what we call headcount planning as a module, is understanding what are your make or breaks. You must have 100. Your ideal scenario is 140. You do really well to have 180, and you work extremely hard to get you 100. I think that's the recognition of the reality that we're in at the moment, Chris. I think.
Yeah, I mean, looking ahead, maybe Melissa from in that
jumping
space.
On that call as well.
Oh, you're back on, Maria. Yeah, keep talking there.
Yeah. I was just going to second what Shannan was saying, and what we've had to do for our last couple of events where we've had a big decrease in volunteer numbers, work out that critical minimum that we can work off and identifying those critical roles. So ensuring that we've got those covered and then substituting roles with paid staff to make sure that there's no gaps, and also to alleviate some stress for the rest of the wider workforce. So I guess probably about 70% of our previous events in the last few months, we've had to get in supplementary workforce, make it a bit more of a level playing field, so that we're alleviating a lot of load and making sure that it's distributed amongst all of the work. And it's worked, and it's one of those things where you make do with what you can, but it's definitely helped the event be more successful.
Thank you. And are there any things that you've implemented to save, in inverted commas, headcount from a volunteer workforce perspective that you might be able to share? Obviously, IRONMAN global organization putting on events all over the world, probably bigger budgets than some of the people that are on this call, but are there any insights that you can give in terms of, as we start to thrive beyond COVID, some of the things that we recognized when that happened to us in Singapore was that it had budget implications, that we were probably overscoping. We were able to cut back. It gave us saved the costs that we probably hadn't really interrogated before, that it's a t-shirt saved, it's a training amount of time saved, it's a meal saved, it's a stipend saved, and we were able to reinvest those into other areas that were, related to workforce, and maybe in terms of rewards and so on. Any insights in terms of when you're coping with those numbers, ways to reduce your numbers using maybe technology, and also where you might be able to then redeploy that budget? I'm guessing that your paid workforce that you just spoke about is maybe taking up more of a budget rather than saving you a budget at the moment.
Yeah, that's correct. I guess with our volunteers, we pay an honorarium, which is a donation to the club based on their participation with us for the event. So I guess it's a matter of tiers over to paid workforce, which does in fact that does become a bigger part of the budget. But outside of that scope, I can't really talk to the way the rest of the budget sort of shuffle to accommodate the workforce.
Got it. Okay. No, thank you, Melissa.
Well, Chris, could I
cut out again? Unfortunately.
That's all right, Maria. All good. One almost just like a bit of a left field here is starting to talk about solutions, because a lot of what we're talking about here is almost a little non-sustainable and not really changing the game in any way, Chris. It's sort of, we're dealing with it compared to trying to get ahead of it. So perhaps one thing we've seen, which we're really excited about, is more of a marketplace capability for volunteers. So a way that organisations can share volunteers, one volunteer having one profile, seeing all opportunities in their area. This is not a new concept. It's more just the appetite to do it is now much more present in this day and age, when the Ironmans of the world, who are traditionally the place where most people want to volunteer and they would have traditionally had pretty decent numbers, are now talking about having 40% reductions, that we need to look at something else. What we're seeing at the moment in New Zealand, we're actually starting a rollout where a volunteer marketplace, that one volunteer can opt into different types of volunteering, being it not-for-profit, emergency relief, cleanup, events, mass participation, and with that one profile, be able to see all their opportunities within one place. The way that I've always felt passionately about this is that it should be driven by the city they are within, or it should happen from within the ecosystem of a sport. FIFA are doing this globally with a one volunteer profile. You can see every FIFA opportunity around the world, because the nature of their volunteers, they do travel a lot, but each time, I could have traveled to 12 FIFA events around the world. Each time I'm treated like a new person every single time, because I am a name on a spreadsheet. FIFA as a sport are changing the way that they are creating that one profile and being able to create a larger pool that they can now call upon for every event. So that's within a sport. And then the city-based approach, where you can, as a volunteer, you can find every opportunity within your city. I think that's also another approach. And maybe, Melissa, you and I have spoken briefly about this, but it's almost like there's so many great events happening in Sydney as a place over the next few years. How do we start to share our resources is one, like it's almost the agreement needs to come from the top first, but then secondly, from a volunteer perspective, how do they not be an individual different person each time they are going to these events? How do they try and create one profile, one passport that can track vaccines, these sorts of things, that these hoops that volunteers are going to need to jump through soon enough? How do we make that an easier process for volunteers as well? That's one thing I wanted to raise tonight, Chris, about potentials of how we can move forward a little more than where we are now.
Wonderful. I think you should take over the chair here, Shannan, because that was literally going to be my segue into the whole...
Sorry, mate.
No, beautiful, into the whole collaboration piece, because I couldn't agree with you more. And, the poll is showing that 58% of people are collaborating already, which leaves an opportunity for more to collaborate. But let's talk about that from your perspective, Melissa. How are you doing some of that collaboration as you lead up to your event? Is the city involved from a FIBA perspective, using the FIFA example? Any insights that you can share with us on that, please?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting about this, we've got a number of major events that are happening in Australia in the next period. So the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup, sort of the start of the runway to the Olympics in 2032.
Yep.
And a number of the events are connecting. So the UCI Cycling Championships, the T20 Men's Cricket, the FIFA Women's World Cup, the football. We've all got together to have conversations around, you know, how do we collaborate, not just from a volunteer perspective, but across the board. One of the things that I think is interesting about Shannan's concept around, you know, a city hub versus a sport hub is, you know, thinking about those organisations that are traditionally always going to be involved in major events or activities that are, you know, in a city, being, you know, could be an office of sport with a state government or a destination organisation, because they're usually involved in funding. Or in Australia, there is the kind of local government association, which all the local governments are participants of, and really thinking about giving back to your community. From our perspective, there is the volunteering part is interesting because you have your technical based volunteers that you need certain level of expertise. And then you have, you know, your volunteers that you want to be the ones who welcome people to the event, and they may have lots of different roles. And one of the things we think about doing is cross-training people so that they're not doing the same thing all the time, is talking to the other events that are happening to say, some are quite close together, so you don't want a burnout situation. But as we move forward and sort of have, you know, us in September 2022, we've got, you know, the FIFA in sort of July, August 23, you go into netball in 27, possibly rugby, and then Olympics. You've got some great timelines, but then you've got your mass participation events that you're talking about that are happening kind of all the time. And I think there's a connectivity piece in there of the things that you do every week. And you know, I've got my GM of events, Lorraine Landon, who's been in the basketball space for a very long time, a really experienced woman. And you know, as she says, people who love certain things that they do the state, they might do association level. So, you know, in your backyard, they might do a state event, they might do a national event. But then when they get, you know, a World Cup or something of that nature, they want to be involved, doesn't matter how, because it is the nature of welcoming guests to our country. And I think there's a real connectivity piece there about how, again, you know, I talk about it as putting the customer at the center of decision making. So putting your volunteer at the center and saying, what's the trail that they will follow to become a volunteer, and how can we connect that up? And actually what it does is, rather than, in my view, rather than it being competing, I think it grows the pie and it encourages more people to come involved, because there becomes a greater community of meeting different people. So I'm very supportive of Shannan and Rosterfy's view on that, kind of that one profile by sport, or thinking about how we do it by location, because that means that event organisers can actually tap into that in a location when you're, you know, Maria's bringing in Cape to Cape in WA and needs volunteers. Where do I tap in to know how to get the volunteers in you know, those cities in WA? And you know, part of it too is through that clubs network.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. I'm interested to hear your insights, Maria, because I think I totally believe that there is a role. My sense in our industry is that a large part of it kind of jealously guards its database and doesn't want to share, and the fear of, you know, taking kind of operational, and I think COVID's really opened that up. If, you know, if there's one positives that's come out of COVID across the world, it's this open sharing of plans, collaboration, and so on. I don't think we're at any better time that I can remember to be better placed to promote that collaboration. But how do you see that happening in the mass participation space? So would, for example, and you may be not in a position to speak from a you know, a decision-making process, but Ironman say, okay, we're gonna share our database of volunteers with all events in Queensland, so our Noosa volunteers might be available to volunteer, and we're collaborating collaborate with Gold Coast Marathon, and we'll collaborate with Brisbane Marathon and the like. Do you see that as something that's likely to happen, or there's a few steps that have to go? Tough question to put you on the spot, but I'm just interested to hear your sense of the mindset in the industry.
It is a tough question. It's obviously there is quite a few steps to making that decision, but I think from my perspective, you know, the more collaboration, the better. The way I would see it is if everyone has a pool of skilled volunteers who have the knowledge, like why would you not share that? Why would you not put the industry in a position where everyone's going to succeed? I think given the last, you know, 12 months, 24 months, you know, seeing people and the lack of events that has been happening, why would you not put anyone in a position to thrive? Like putting that opportunity out there for other teams to be a part of, I think that would be phenomenal, and I'd be all for the collaboration and sharing databases if that were the case.
I'd love to, as a kind of a step further on that, because I love this one, and I think it's, you know, a great opportunity for the events industry, and I think, you know, my sense of 35 years in the industry, we often tend to compare ourselves with ourselves rather than with other industries, whether that be other elements of sport or even other industries for learnings. So we let's assume that this gets embraced and everybody wants to be involved. How do we go about training? Is there an opportunity for accreditation? And I'm going to pop a poll in just to get a sense of what people do from a training perspective right now. But our sense of, you know, you got a volunteer that's worked on the FIBA event, and how relevant are they to a mass participation event in Ironman? There's definitely core skills, but do we need, and Shannan, maybe you have some answers to this, that there's kind of an accreditation process, or is it a pool of volunteers that's available and then they get individually trained and skilled by the events that use them, or does that take it a step further? Step one is here's a pool, step two is accreditation, and it goes even further. Any thoughts?
Yeah.
Maria, maybe take one first, because you haven't had much of a chance, and then we'll throw it back to Shannan. What would you say?
No, yeah, absolutely.
Give me a second to think about that. If we can flick to Shannan first, I do have some thoughts. I just want to think about it a bit more.
Absolutely. Shannan, your sense?
Maybe I'll answer it in a different way. Some work we're doing with FIFA at the moment is they're trying to build this pathway for volunteers to paid workers. And the reality is the volunteers do not have the skills or the capabilities or the certificates for a lot of these roles and contract positions that they may be soon able to see. And this is not something that's live now. It's scoping. It's more just sharing this as a context for the industry and what people are trying to do. But the ability then is for those volunteers to be able to see these positions and see the skill requirements they need to have to get them. And perhaps if we bring this back to mass participation, there would then be a link to the online training module or the accreditation induction that they must complete to do that. But this can all be done and will be all done digitally. And if it's not being done digitally, it will be in 12 months' time. And it's certainly a nudge that we've all received, I think, through this period to do that. So I think the reality is that, and if I bring it back to the youth as well, that are wanting to get into the market of jobs, to be more upskilled, to be able to get a job, like they're the people that are out there that are wanting to upskill. So let's give them that opportunity, and let's put it in a medium that they understand really well, and make it simple to put on their phone for some simple inductions, trainings, doing those interviews through Zoom and Teams, so that they don't need to travel an hour and a half in as a volunteer to do something. You need to. We've been saying this for 5 years, but it needs to be on the silver platter to make their engagement as simple as possible. And then I think what's been missing perhaps in the volunteer space, in my opinion, for the last 5 or 6 years has been they're just a volunteer. And I think that this pathway that FIFA is moving towards, and many others that we're seeing, is the ability to say, well, you're outstanding. Here's the other opportunities. Look, let's put them in front of you. And if you're interested, like, put your hand up. And also, if you're short of skills, here's the online course or the internship perhaps, or the 100 hours that you must do to be able to get to this level. And I think for Maria organizations like an Ironman to have like a a level of volunteer perhaps that's showing like a, you know, bronze, silver, gold, whatever it needs to be, that you're showing a pathway for volunteers. And doing that with also, Chris, my last point here would be through reward and recognition. So the ability to track hours or shifts worked digitally in a system. So it's not like, Maria, who was that person that worked 6 times last year? You literally have a user profile against that person that's tracking and progressing them through this pathway, so that at the start of your next season, you can see who's the 12 volunteers that have done their internship or have reached the gold star, that we can now move into this paid casual positions and then potentially into contract and full time.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think the point following on from that, which you're kind of making already, is it makes perfect commercial sense. If I look back, you know, some of my best employees started out as volunteers, and it's a two-way street, because it gave me the opportunity to understand their skills and their cultural fit with the organization. But importantly, it gave them the opportunity. You know, how many people go off and do a degree thinking that they want to go down one path and then discover they've gone down the wrong road? But people that have volunteered in events who think they might want to get in the events industry, it either reaffirms it, or they might do a couple of volunteering events, say, well, this industry is not for me. So there's great opportunity to bring people meaningfully, and, you know, clearly purpose is one, which is, you know, our industry delivers purpose in spades now, and there's opportunity for a younger generation to come through on that and then make commercial sense to get a job that they absolutely love, that makes sense. Let's come back to you, Maria. You got a few ideas?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of making it digital. So I guess in terms of like keeping that profile of our volunteers, you know, we've had volunteers that have started with us from when they were 15, and now they've, you know, been in the system for more than 3-4 years, and they've worked their way up, and their skills have increased, and the knowledge that they've had, they've been around for more than 4 years, and they've just seamlessly transitioned through that system, and they've now gone through that paid role through, you know, us understanding their skill set and being able to develop on it, and them having an understanding of what they wanted to achieve and where they wanted to be. Because originally they did start off as a volunteer, and, you know, were in it, studying in a different field, and realizing they did want to be in the mass participation industry. They're now one of our regular team members that have come on board. So it's really good to be able to understand, I guess, those return volunteers that have been on board. Because I guess even in the Ironman world, for example, we've had volunteer groups that have, you know, been around for 15 years, that have been doing this, you know, part of our groups that are always coming back for news to try every year, and we know that they're going to be on the aid station, and we know that they're going to bring their group, you know, for the last 10 years, and they've got all that experience and knowledge, and we reward them every year. So we do little things like barbecues and whatnot to keep those teams around, because the information that they have is so valuable for our teams. But just to see them there and to progress through that, and then also with them being around for so long, them then being able to transfer that knowledge over to younger volunteers that are just starting off. And it's just a really great cycle to then bring those tiers up. And we do end up getting more volunteers with more experience, which is phenomenal.
That's great. Thanks, Maria. And there's a couple of comments here and a question. So what are the recognitions that volunteers look for who have been loyal for more than 5 to 7 years? That's from Mandar Pandaya. And then there's one from Ho Yang Sang. A cross-training calendar for volunteers is interesting. There is a sense happiness of progressing could be delivered. So that's more of a comment. But, you know, in any sense in terms of, you know, talking about what the rewards are, who would like to tackle that one? You know, Melissa, you've obviously got a short lead time. How are you going to reward those? Maria, yours. Maybe you want to pick that one up, Melissa, as a starting point, and then let's hear what Shannan and Maria have to say in terms of reward and recognition.
I know in the context of my previous role with Surf Lifesaving, we actually did recognise people, you know, who had been with us for several years. So when they were on a particular event, when we had the kind of end of event barbecue and thank you, there were recognition awards that were delivered, you know, with everybody present to recognise their support. And that pathway through that Maria's talking about, of then having volunteers who've been there for a long time, or a period of time, actually being the ones that are sort of training the trainers and coming through. In relation to the World Cup, it's obviously it's a shorter, sharper activity, and developing that kind of recognition program will be about, you know, how we think about thanking our volunteers and doing that by way of, you know, an event at the end, recognition of, you know, senior people in the business participating and being there and actually being the ones to say thank you. You know, it doesn't cost anything to say thank you and do that in a meaningful way and recognize the time and effort people have put in to be at your event, and actually thinking and planning about that. The other thing that we're looking at doing from a kind of training perspective is for certain volunteers to participate in our risk readiness and contingency planning, so that they're actually can see and participate in that, in those activities that are pretty important if things go pear-shaped. So, you know, thinking about how we train our volunteers in those areas, I think is part of that kind of recognition piece as well as to their skills and ability, because they bring different things to the table, and we need to recognize that.
Thanks, Melissa. And it's interesting, you said reward and recognition, and I'm wondering if the question on some people's mind is, you know, is reward monetary? Is it material? Or in your experience, it's generally more about the acknowledgement and the recognition? So it's not necessarily, maybe I'm posing the question, getting a cap or getting a goodie bag or something along those lines. It's that honor of recognition to say, you know, we appreciate what you've done. My sense is that that's probably more than something that's material. Is that correct?
Look, I think so. I you know, to be fair, I think it's both. I think, you know, different things ring different people's bells, to be honest. And having something that says I have been and participated in that event is important. And, you know, whether it's a cap or a t-shirt or whatever that is, it's still, the business has recognized their investment of time. But I do feel that recognition piece is really important, to be able to say thank you and do it in a meaningful way. That's not just about come and pick up your volunteer pack, but actually we're hopefully increasing the skills that you've had by being a part of this event, and we've all benefited from that. And there's a pathway, because they then take that back to, you know, potentially the activities that they're doing week on week, because they've learned something new as a part of being involved in that event.
That's wonderful. Shannan, you want to add something to that? Folks, just before it starts, we got about 5 minutes. There's one question in the Q&A I've seen. Feel free to drop any more in there, and I always like to try and wrap up on time. So maybe just, Shannan, maybe if you'd like to answer.
Yeah.
I'd love to come back to each of you with, you know, one key takeaway that you'd like to leave the audience with. I'll answer the questions first, and then as a kind of a final wrap, each one of you to say, you know, if there was one piece of advice you'd be giving, what would it be that you'd be leaving?
Yep. So on the reward and recognizing, 2 quick points. One, the Super Bowl and many other major events we work at, a big way that they do reward and recognition is to get people to come back every day. The worst thing is to get people first day, they have a crap experience, they don't turn up the 3rd day. And I would appreciate IRONMAN and others. You would have volunteers, not just solely for event day. There are some that are there for regos coming through Friday, Saturday, Sunday. What the Super Bowl do very well is on the check-in, it shows up saying, hey, Melissa, welcome back for your 2nd day. Here's your PIN. And there is a planned program that's in there. And on check-in, you should be able to see that live, compared to, hey, how many shifts have you been here for? Oh, this is actually my 7th in a row. You didn't appreciate that, or you didn't recognize that? Having systems to be able to show these things instantly and transact that in a system is important. The second point is being able to gamify reward and recognition. So I recognize the end of year barbecues and things, but I think that moving forward, and for us, where we'd love to see the industry moving to is a way that volunteers, there's so many sporadic volunteer opportunities that can pop up as well, other than just event time. There are so many other ways. I think I saw Cancer Research in UK on the call. We work with Mother's Day Classic here in Australia. When their events got cancelled, they needed more than just event volunteers, because their events all got cancelled. They needed graphic designers, they needed other people, fundraising specialists to come into the organization. So they were rewarding and recognizing their volunteers for the time they were giving for their organization that wasn't necessarily planned and organized by the administrators. And through the system, they can sort of schedule themselves and then claim rewards. And they might be, it could be anything, discounted petrol offers. But my last point is, Maria, Chris Randall was with Ironman in New Zealand. We actually did a podcast with him, the Engaged Volunteer, for anyone that's interested in checking it out. He speaks about how they commercialize their reward and recognition through commercial partners. So there's a way to bring sponsors into that reward and recognition. I think that's a really clever way to do these things. And hey, everyone's needing other commercial assets to sell these days. Why not have a win-win and partner with someone to do that? So maybe that can be my last piece there, Chris. I appreciate I've spoken a lot today.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful point. Thank you for that one. Let's come to you, Maria, for yours. In fact, why don't we first, let's quickly take this question and then we'll come to Maria and Melissa. So this is Mandal Pandaya. How do you attract people to volunteer? I'm asking, as in India, the concept of volunteering is not there, but we're very keen to adopt this and have a great volunteering family. Who would like to take that? Shall I maybe I'm happy to give a bit of an insight into how I saw the industry grow in Singapore in that perspective, and if anyone else would like to drop in. Volunteering wasn't huge. I was in Singapore for 15 years or so with the Singapore Marathon. We had a volunteer force of over 5,000 in that, and it took a while to build that. It took a while to get the unis and the school and everyone on board. And the reality was that in quite a lot of parts of Asia, it really isn't volunteering as it's understood in other parts of the world. Everybody expected a per diem that was paid, and that varied from event to event. And there were rewards on top of that in terms of meals and other recognitions and things that we used to do. So I think the answer is that you probably know your culture there better than most of us on this call. It's, how do you adapt it to the culture? How do you start to seed it? I think often big events are what creates the legacy. So I was lucky enough to work on Sydney Olympics, and there was this massive volunteer workforce that went on. Many of them, obviously, unfortunately, not with us any longer. Same thing happened in Singapore. The real catalyst there was the Youth Olympic Games, and that created the big volunteer group there that then went out. So I think sometimes it's, in summary, understanding the culture and also a big event is often a catalyst to be able to make that one grow. Anyone got anything to add on that as a concept?
I think sometimes too, it's thinking about what skills do you need from a volunteer perspective, and that can actually help you direct where you might go to find your volunteer. So I think scoping what you need is often also an interesting way of doing it, to think about, where do those people live? Are they, kids at school? Are they university students? Are they, what are the skills? And then you can find the associations or the groups. If it's accounting, the accounting, associations or whatever it might be. I think is another way to think about, starting and attracting people to volunteer.
That's a great point. Thanks, Melissa. And, we were talking about it on our planning call earlier in the week, is that I think sometimes events are fixated on volunteers for event day, but there's so many amazingly skilled people in a volunteer workforce, and by having a system that understands those, you have this opportunity to bring often highly skilled people who would love to give their time to come and work in the office. And often it's about being part of a community and the camaraderie, and you got this opportunity sometimes to have someone who's been a CEO of a major organization who's retired, who'd love to come into a small business and give some business advice and help out, or by being asked to do a particular project, they then pass on other advice. Come back to you, Maria, for your tip takeaway.
I think it's all about collaboration. I think if we can continue to work together, pool our resources, it just means that we're going to be super successful for 2022, and hopefully it means that we'll have a bigger and better industry, and all of our volunteers will slowly start being comfortable with the unknowns, and we can start moving forward from there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Melissa, your final tip?
I suppose for me, I think it's about cross-training too, thinking about our volunteers and the skills they have, but maybe some skills they don't, so that not only are they learning and developing, but we're creating a residual kind of situation where if things fall away or somebody can't do something, we've got that backup piece there.
Great point. Thank you. Folks, thank you so much to those of you that have joined. I hope it's been valuable. I've got some great insights on it. I've been in the industry for 35 years and I've learned plenty of things tonight. So hopefully that's the case for all of you. A big thank you to our panelists for staying up so late. It's now 11 o'clock in Australia. Maria Coiro, Melissa King, and Shannan Gove, thank you so much. All the very best for events coming up next year, Melissa, and in a couple of days for you, Maria, and Shannan, you're all over the globe and growing fast, and some fantastic initiatives there. Thanks so much for your sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Everyone, bye.
Take care, everybody. Best of luck.
Thanks.